Welcome back to Ozarks Tonight. One piece of Ozarks history will leave you scratching your head. To this day, it still remains a mystery. Author of Ozarks Alive, Caitlin McConnell is here to tell us how a farmer's barrel in Simmons, Missouri became a tourist destination in the 1950s. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Who were Mr. and Mrs. Orr, and what's the story with their barrel?
Well, I came across, I'll start a little bit before the actual story is. I came across the story a couple of years ago after a newspaper article came out about it, and it kind of made me scratch my head. This is kind of a very unusual story, but the deal is back in the 1950s, there was a farming couple out in Texas County, Missouri, who had a barrel, as you would not be super surprised to hear about. They had animals, they needed to water them. But this particular barrel was a little bit different because once they filled it up with water, they found that it did not need to be refilled necessarily. They had installed this wooden barrel for their chickens, and there was a pipe that went out to the water trough, but they realized after a while that it just kept refilling itself. And so this became, as you could imagine, kind of unusual and got a lot of attention back then, because most of the time it would have been a great deal of effort to go and have to fill up your barrel all the time for your animals.
And Rain couldn't explain it from what I read either. How did the Orrs become aware of what was happening?
Well, initially the husband, Mr. Orr, was kind of, the primary point of contact with that. And, he kind of thought it was a little bit strange. He noticed that for a while. But it wasn't until after his wife had to take over the chores for a while, he became sick and had to lay off for a few days, she realized what was going on. And initially they kind of talked about it and thought maybe it was a prank. They thought their son might have been doing that to try and make them wonder what was going on. He swore up and down it wasn't him. And also in conventional Ozarks wisdom, someone pointed out at one point, really, is someone going to carry water every night in the middle of the night for like a quarter of a mile, I think the river, to just do something as a prank? I don't think that many people would want to do that. And so, that made it kind of more suspicious too. Even a prankster gets tired after a while, and this just kept happening. And so eventually, they kind of started telling their neighbors about what's going on, and nobody could figure out what was happening. And eventually a news story in West Plains Daily Quill, which is a newspaper nearby where I live, did a story, and that got, quite a bit of attention. People really interested in learning more about this barrel, and, figured they would, surely somebody figured out what was going on. But in the meantime, everybody really wanted to come see it and see if they could figure it out for themselves. And so after a while, thousands of people began visiting the farm. And part of that was because after the initial story, the barrel was picked up in some other news stories across the country. And a couple of key people, one who was a man from North Carolina, in the area visiting, and read about it in the Quill and decided to visit it. And he mentioned it, back out east, from what I understand. But also another man was a man called C.C. Williford, who back during that time was very well known and was on KWTO and was a weatherman. And he came out to see the barrel too, and then presumably told people about it on KWTO. And so there were a few weeks during that summer of 1950 when literally thousands of people were descending on the farm, to the point that they couldn't have any semblance of a normal life at all. And there was one article I found pretty funny that said that Mrs. Orr had not been able to cook a meal for 3 days, and her friend would bring her food because, normally she would have been doing that multiple times a day, but there were so many people who came that she just couldn't catch it. And so, as you can imagine, this kind of got to be wearing on the Orrs after a while, to have all these people randomly showing up. And so they eventually told people they didn't want any more visitors. They, said it was closed. That sort of got people's attention. I would expect it slowed the visitors some, but newspapers, especially back then with technology being limited, didn't all know that it was, supposedly stopped. And so people kept printing more and more stories. But eventually things really did come to a head when the barrel was stolen later that year. And that obviously, I think it was later that year, it was a few months after payday in any event. And then that kind of really put it into the story. But that said, as far as I've been able to tell, I don't think anyone has ever fully understood what happened. You would assume it probably was some sort of a prank, but they said it wasn't. And they had people who sat there and watched the barrel for hours at a time and never saw anybody add water. So who really knows?
They couldn't debunk it. Now, visitors even started talking about the barrel possibly having some supernatural powers, and I understand Mrs. Orr even had some concerns about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously this would have been a huge mystery. I mean, it'd be a huge mystery today, let alone back then. And I think that, you try to find explanations that sort of help you understand things. And in this case, a supernatural intervention seemed like one of the easiest ways for them to rationalize why a barrel would keep filling up with water. And I think, but for her, she was very religious, and I think that it was seen as sort of a warning, maybe. I know there was another farmer they interviewed for the story for his opinion of it, and he thought it meant that the end of the world was coming. So I'm really glad he was wrong. With his opinion, opinions on this vary greatly as to what this was trying to convey to the public.
Now, did the Orrs charge people to come and take a look at this, or did they just get all these visitors? Like you said, it got to a point where they weren't wanted anymore, but did they capitalize on it at all?
Not that I was able to see. And at one point, even Mr. Orr was asked about it. He said he didn't want to charge because he was afraid it would stop happening. So, he still needed to water those chickens. So I can understand why he would prefer for that barrel to keep refilling itself. It would have been quite the chore to tote water all the way from the river.
How long did this last?
I think it was in the summer of 1950 when things really started taking off with the visitors. And it had pretty much, wrapped up. Well, they were ready to stop the visitors within just a few weeks. But then, I can't remember exactly when the barrel was stolen, but it was just a few months later at the longest. And so it really was a pretty short-lived, in the grand scheme of things, story. But it was interesting in my research, even decades later, an article I found mentioned that some people from elsewhere had called the Houston newspaper, I think, to ask about it. So there was widespread interest, and the legend lived on for a really long time. And even, after I wrote the article and shared it in some of the Facebook groups around that area, there were lots of people who remembered hearing the story growing up, and a couple people who even, I think, had seen it firsthand. But that, unfortunately, with that having been so many years ago, there are many fewer people who saw it with their own eyes, but a lot of people who heard the legend growing up.
Absolutely. Pretty interesting story. Caitlin, thanks so much for joining us. And for more history of the Ozarks, make sure you check out Caitlin's website, ozarksalive.com. We'll be right back.